"You corrupted my daughter." Frank Morrison's voice cut through the Las Vegas Hilton like a knife as he burst onto the stage. Elvis was mid-verse in Hound Dog when the 45-year-old construction worker from Oklahoma charged past security, pointing an accusatory finger. The music stopped. 18,000 people fell silent. Frank's voice shook with rage and desperation. "My 16-year-old daughter Rebecca ran away from home to follow you. She's been missing for 3 days." Security guards rushed toward the stage, but Elvis raised his hand. "Wait," Elvis said, his voice carrying through the arena. "Let him speak." Frank's eyes filled with tears as he faced the king. "She left a note saying she's going to be with her real family, your fans. Please, Mr. Presley, help me find my little girl." But what happened next was something nobody in that arena could have predicted. It was November 23, 1974, and Elvis was in the middle of one of his most energetic performances of the year at the Las Vegas Hilton. The crowd of 18,000 was electric, hanging on every word, every movement, every note that came from the king of rock and roll. Elvis had just finished an explosive version of Burning Love and was transitioning into Hound Dog when the unthinkable happened. Frank Morrison was not supposed to be at that concert. The 45-year-old construction worker from Tulsa, Oklahoma, had driven 12 hours straight to Las Vegas with one desperate mission: to confront the man he believed had stolen his daughter's heart and mind. Frank was a simple man who had worked with his hands his entire life, building homes and supporting his family through honest labor. He had never been to a concert before, had never even listened to rock and roll music, and certainly had never imagined he would find himself face to face with Elvis Presley on a Las Vegas stage. 3 days earlier, Frank's world had been turned upside down when he came home from work to find his wife Margaret sobbing at the kitchen table, holding a handwritten note. Their 16-year-old daughter Rebecca, their only child, had disappeared. The note was brief but devastating. "Mom and Dad, I can't live in a world where people don't understand what music really means. I'm going to Las Vegas to be with my real family, Elvis's fans. Don't try to find me. I need to be where I belong." Rebecca Morrison had always been a good student, a quiet girl who helped her mother with household chores and rarely caused trouble. But everything changed 6 months earlier when she heard Elvis Presley's music for the first time on a friend's radio. What started as casual interest quickly became an obsession that consumed every aspect of her life. She began buying Elvis records with her babysitting money, covering her bedroom walls with his photographs, and talking about nothing except Elvis Presley and his music. Frank had watched his daughter's transformation with growing concern and confusion. The sweet, obedient girl who used to ask about his day at work now seemed to live in a world where only Elvis mattered. She would spend hours listening to his music, memorizing lyrics, and reading fan magazines. When Frank tried to talk to her about school, her future, or family matters, Rebecca would respond with quotes from Elvis songs or stories about his concerts that she had read about but never attended. The situation reached a breaking point when Rebecca announced that she planned to use her college savings to attend Elvis concerts in Las Vegas. Frank, a practical man who had worked double shifts to save money for his daughter's education, was horrified by the idea of throwing away her future for what he saw as a temporary teenage infatuation. The arguments that followed grew increasingly heated, with Rebecca accusing her parents of not understanding her, and Frank becoming more frustrated with what he perceived as his daughter's irresponsible behavior. Margaret Morrison, a schoolteacher who had always been close to her daughter, found herself caught in the middle of an escalating conflict she didn't understand. She watched helplessly as her husband and daughter grew further apart, each becoming more entrenched in their positions. Margaret tried to mediate, suggesting compromises and attempting to understand Rebecca's passion for Elvis's music, but her efforts only seemed to make the situation worse. The night before Rebecca disappeared, she and Frank had their worst argument yet. Frank, exhausted from a long day of construction work and frustrated by months of tension in his household, had finally exploded. "This Elvis obsession is ruining our family," he had shouted. "You're throwing your life away for some singer who doesn't even know you exist." Rebecca had responded with tears and angry words. "You don't understand. Elvis's music speaks to my soul in a way that nothing else does. His fans are like a family that actually cares about what matters." When Frank woke up the next morning to find his daughter gone, He felt a mixture of panic, guilt, and rage that he had never experienced before. The police were sympathetic but offered little hope of finding a runaway teenager who didn't want to be found, especially one who had left of her own free will. Private investigators were expensive, and Frank's construction worker salary couldn't support an extended search. As the hours turned into days with no word from Rebecca, Frank's desperation grew into a single-minded determination to confront the man he held responsible for his daughter's disappearance. Frank's journey to Las Vegas was fueled by a father's love and a simple man's need for answers. He had spent his life solving problems with his hands and his determination, but this crisis required him to enter a world he didn't understand and confront a celebrity whose influence he couldn't comprehend. As he drove through the desert toward Las Vegas, Frank rehearsed what he would say to Elvis Presley, imagining scenarios where the famous singer would help him understand and retrieve his lost daughter. The Las Vegas Hilton was unlike anything Frank had ever experienced. The luxury, the crowds, the excitement, and the sheer scale of the production overwhelmed a man accustomed to the simple rhythms of construction work and small-town life. Frank had used most of his savings to buy a ticket to Elvis's show, betting everything on a desperate plan to somehow reach the performer and ask for his help. For the first hour of the concert, Frank sat in his seat, watching Elvis perform with a mixture of awe and resentment. He could see why his daughter was attracted to the charismatic performer, but he also felt a growing anger at the man whose music had seemingly stolen his child. The thousands of screaming fans around him only reinforced Frank's belief that Elvis had created an unhealthy obsession that had torn families apart. When Elvis began Hound Dog, something inside Frank snapped. All the frustration, fear, and love he felt for his missing daughter crystallized into a moment of desperate action. Without thinking about consequences or security, Frank stood up and began pushing his way toward the stage, driven by a father's need to do something, anything, to bring his daughter home. The moment Frank burst onto the stage, the entire atmosphere of the concert changed. The music stopped abruptly, and 18,000 people who had been singing and dancing suddenly fell into stunned silence. Elvis, who had been moving across the stage with his characteristic energy, froze as he saw the desperate man approaching him with obvious emotional distress. Frank's accusation, "You corrupted my daughter," echoed through the arena with the force of a man who had nothing left to lose. His words carried the pain of a father who felt powerless to protect his child from influences he couldn't understand or control. The accusation was both personal and universal, speaking to the fears of parents everywhere who watched their children embrace cultures and values that seemed to threaten family unity. Elvis's response to Frank's outburst revealed the character that had made him beloved by millions. Instead of having security remove the distraught father, instead of dismissing his concerns or becoming defensive, Elvis made a choice that demonstrated genuine humanity. By raising his hand to stop security and saying, "Let him speak," Elvis showed that he understood the gravity of Frank's desperation and was willing to treat him with dignity and respect. The conversation that followed between Frank and Elvis, conducted in front of 18,000 witnesses, became one of the most emotionally powerful moments in concert history. Frank, his voice breaking with emotion, explained his daughter's obsession and disappearance, while Elvis listened with genuine concern and empathy. The arena, which had been filled with excitement and entertainment just moments before, became the setting for a deeply human drama about family, communication, and understanding. What made Elvis's response so remarkable was his immediate recognition that Frank's anger came from love, not hatred. Elvis understood that the desperate father on his stage was not an enemy, but a man in pain who needed help, not confrontation. Instead of defending himself or his music, Elvis chose to focus on the real issue, a missing daughter and a family in crisis. "Sir," Elvis said, his voice gentle but carrying clearly through the arena's sound system, "I can see you're hurting. Tell me about Rebecca. When did you last see her?" Frank, surprised by Elvis's compassionate response, found himself opening up about his daughter's gradual transformation and eventual disappearance. As he spoke, his anger began to give way to the vulnerability of a father who felt he had failed to protect his child. Elvis listened carefully to Frank's story, asking questions that showed he was genuinely interested in understanding the situation. "What was Rebecca like before she discovered my music?" Elvis asked. "What made her happy? What were her dreams?" These questions forced Frank to think about his daughter as a complex individual rather than simply a problem to be solved. As Frank described Rebecca's personality, her intelligence, and her dreams of going to college, Elvis began to see a picture of a teenage girl struggling to find her identity and place in the world. "Mr. Morrison," Elvis said thoughtfully, "it sounds like Rebecca is a smart young woman who's trying to figure out who she is. Sometimes music becomes a way for people to express feelings they can't put into words." The conversation between Elvis and Frank continued for several minutes, with the entire audience listening in respectful silence. Elvis shared his own experiences as a young man trying to find his place in the world, and he acknowledged the challenges that parents face when their children embrace new forms of expression. "I never intended for my music to come between families," Elvis said sincerely. "Music should bring people together, not tear them apart." What happened next surprised everyone in the arena, including Frank himself. Elvis asked Frank to describe Rebecca in detail and requested that anyone in the audience who had seen a 16-year-old girl from Oklahoma in the past few days please come forward. "Ladies and gentlemen," Elvis announced to the crowd, "we have a father here who's looking for his daughter. She's 16 years old, about 5'4", with brown hair and brown eyes. Her name is Rebecca Morrison, and her family is worried sick about her." The response from the audience was immediate and overwhelming. Instead of returning to the concert, thousands of people began talking among themselves, sharing information and offering to help. Several audience members approached the stage with information about young fans they had encountered, and hotel staff began coordinating search efforts in real time. But the most remarkable moment came when a voice from the back of the arena called out, "Daddy? Daddy, is that you?" The entire crowd turned toward the voice, and there, making her way through the audience, was Rebecca Morrison herself. She had been at the concert, sitting in the back rows, when she saw her father on stage. The reunion between Frank and Rebecca in front of 18,000 people was both heartbreaking and healing. Rebecca, seeing her father's desperation and pain, realized for the first time how much her disappearance had hurt her family. Frank, seeing his daughter safe and recognizing the genuine emotion in her love for music, began to understand that her passion was not a rejection of her family but an expression of her developing identity. Elvis facilitated the reunion with sensitivity and wisdom that impressed everyone present. He invited both Frank and Rebecca to join him on stage, creating a safe space for them to begin healing their relationship. "Rebecca," Elvis said gently, "your father drove 12 hours to find you. That's not the action of someone who doesn't love you. And Frank, your daughter's passion for music is a beautiful thing. It doesn't mean she loves you any less." The conversation that followed between father and daughter, mediated by Elvis and witnessed by thousands, addressed the fundamental misunderstandings that had driven them apart. Rebecca explained that her love for Elvis's music was not an escape from her family, but a way of expressing emotions and dreams that she hadn't known how to communicate. Frank, for his part, admitted that his fear of losing his daughter had made him react with anger instead of trying to understand her perspective. Elvis, drawing on his own experiences as both a son and a performer, helped Frank and Rebecca find common ground. He suggested that Rebecca's passion for music could be channeled into positive pursuits, such as studying music in college or participating in local musical activities. He also encouraged Frank to listen to his daughter's music with an open mind, not to approve or disapprove, but to understand what it meant to her. The emotional breakthrough came when Frank, standing on stage in front of thousands of strangers, apologized to his daughter for not listening to her. "Rebecca," he said, his voice thick with emotion, "I was so afraid of losing you that I couldn't see I was pushing you away. I'm sorry." Rebecca, tears streaming down her face, hugged her father tightly. "I'm sorry too, Daddy. I didn't mean to hurt you. I just wanted you to understand how important this is to me." Elvis, moved by the reconciliation he had witnessed, made a gesture that became legendary among his fans. He removed one of his signature scarves and placed it around Rebecca's shoulders. "This is for you," he said, "but I want you to promise me something. Promise me you'll finish school, go to college, and pursue your dreams. All of them, not just the ones related to music. And promise me you'll always remember how much your parents love you." The concert resumed after Frank and Rebecca were reunited, but the atmosphere had changed completely. What had begun as entertainment had become a community experience of healing and understanding. Elvis dedicated the rest of his performance to families everywhere who were trying to understand each other, and the audience sang along with a unity and emotion that transformed the arena into something resembling a church. The story of Elvis, Frank, and Rebecca became legendary, not just among Elvis fans but in discussions about family communication and generational understanding. Frank and Rebecca's relationship was permanently changed by their experience that night. They developed a new way of communicating that acknowledged both Frank's concerns as a parent and Rebecca's need for independence and self-expression. Rebecca did finish high school and went on to college, where she studied music education. She became a teacher who specialized in helping parents understand their children's musical interests and helping young people channel their passions into constructive pursuits. She often told her students about the night Elvis Presley helped her family heal, emphasizing the importance of communication, understanding, and love in overcoming generational differences. Frank, for his part, developed a new appreciation for the power of music to express emotions and bring people together. He never became an Elvis fan in the traditional sense, but he gained a deep respect for the man who had shown such kindness to his family in their moment of crisis. Frank often spoke about the experience at community events, sharing the lesson that love and understanding could overcome even the most difficult family conflicts. Elvis himself was profoundly affected by the encounter with Frank and Rebecca. The experience reinforced his belief that his role as a performer extended beyond entertainment to include responsibility for the emotional well-being of his fans and their families. He began incorporating more direct interaction with his audiences, always looking for opportunities to use his platform to heal rather than divide. In the days following the concert, Elvis received hundreds of letters from parents and teenagers who had been in the audience that night. Many shared their own stories of family conflict and reconciliation, crediting the experience they witnessed as inspiration for improving their own relationships. Dr. Sarah Williams, a family therapist from Las Vegas who had been in the audience, later wrote about the psychological principles that Elvis had intuitively employed during the crisis. What Mr. Presley did that night, Dr. Williams explained in her subsequent research paper, was create a safe space for authentic communication between a father and daughter who had lost the ability to hear each other. By removing the defensiveness and creating an environment of mutual respect, he allowed both parties to express their true feelings without fear of judgment or retaliation. The incident became a touchstone for discussions about celebrity influence and family dynamics. Child psychologists and family counselors began using the story as an example of how conflicts based on misunderstanding could be resolved through open communication and mutual respect. The story also highlighted the importance of treating both parents and children with dignity when addressing generational conflicts. Dr. Michael Chen, a leading expert in adolescent psychology at UCLA, incorporated the Elvis Morrison case study into his research on parent-teen communication. The remarkable thing about this incident, Dr. Chen noted, is how it demonstrates that the most effective intervention in family conflict often comes from a neutral third party who can see the love underlying the anger. Elvis's intuitive understanding of human nature allowed him to identify the real issue, not the music itself, but the breakdown in communication between people who loved each other deeply. The Las Vegas Hilton began receiving requests from families across the country, asking if Elvis could help with their own conflicts. While Elvis couldn't personally intervene in every case, he worked with hotel management to establish a family counseling program that provided free sessions for families experiencing generational conflicts. The program, funded by Elvis's charitable foundation, helped hundreds of families over the following years. Margaret Morrison, Rebecca's mother, later described the phone call she received from her husband the night of the concert. "When Frank called me from Las Vegas to tell me Rebecca was safe, I could barely understand him through his tears," she recalled. "But what struck me most was how differently he talked about our daughter. For the first time in months, he spoke about her with pride instead of frustration." Elvis had somehow helped him remember that Rebecca's passion was a strength, not a weakness. The reunion between Frank and Rebecca was just the beginning of their healing process. In the weeks that followed, they worked together to establish new patterns of communication that honored both Frank's role as a protective father and Rebecca's need for independence and self-expression. They established regular music nights where Rebecca would share new songs with her parents, explaining what the lyrics meant to her and how the music connected to her experiences and emotions. Frank, determined to understand his daughter's world better, even attended a few more Elvis concerts with Rebecca over the following year. While he never developed a taste for rock and roll music, he gained a deep appreciation for the community and emotional connection that Elvis's fans shared. "I realized that Rebecca wasn't running away from our family," Frank later explained. "She was trying to find a way to be herself within our family, and I had been making that impossible by refusing to understand what mattered to her." Rebecca's experience also led to changes in how she approached her passion for music. Working with her parents, she developed a more balanced relationship with her Elvis fandom that enhanced rather than replaced her other interests and relationships. She began writing her own songs, using music as a way to process her experiences and emotions. Her first composition, written a month after the Las Vegas reunion, was titled "Finding My Way Home," and told the story of a daughter who learned that love and independence could coexist. The story of that November night in Las Vegas spread far beyond the Elvis fan community. Major newspapers picked up the story, and it was featured in magazines focused on family relationships and parenting. The incident inspired television specials about celebrity influence on families and led to academic studies about the role of music in adolescent identity development. Elvis's handling of the crisis became a model for other performers facing similar situations. When country singer Dolly Parton encountered a similar incident during one of her concerts, a mother who blamed Dolly's music for her daughter's decision to leave home for Nashville, Dolly specifically referenced Elvis's approach and worked to facilitate a conversation between the mother and daughter that led to their reconciliation. The psychological principles demonstrated that night became known in academic circles as the Presley method of family intervention. The technique emphasized several key elements: creating a neutral, safe space for communication, acknowledging the valid emotions of all parties, focusing on underlying love rather than surface conflicts, and facilitating understanding rather than trying to determine who was right or wrong. Training programs for family counselors began incorporating role-playing exercises based on the Morrison intervention. Counselors would practice the techniques Elvis had used: active listening, emotional validation, and the creation of opportunities for family members to see each other's perspectives. The success rate of family therapy programs that incorporated these principles increased significantly, leading to widespread adoption of the approach. The story also had a profound impact on how the entertainment industry approached its relationship with fans and families. Major record labels began developing guidelines for artists on how to handle family conflicts that arose from fan devotion. Concert venues started training security personnel to recognize and appropriately respond to family crisis situations. The incident essentially created a new standard of social responsibility for performers and the entertainment industry as a whole. Elvis's own approach to performing was permanently changed by his experience with the Morrison family. He began each concert with a brief moment of acknowledgement for the families in the audience, often saying something like, "I want to thank not just my fans tonight but the families who support them and the parents who brought them here. Music should bring families together, never tear them apart." This became such a signature part of his performances that other artists began adopting similar acknowledgments. The Elvis Presley Charitable Foundation, inspired by the Morrison incident, established the Family Harmony Program in 19. The program provided free family counseling services to families experiencing conflicts related to music, entertainment, or generational differences. Over the course of its operation, the program helped more than 3,000 families work through their conflicts and rebuild their relationships. Rebecca Morrison became one of the program's first volunteer counselors after completing her education degree. She specialized in working with teenage girls who felt misunderstood by their parents and parents who struggled to connect with their children's interests. Her unique perspective, having experienced both sides of the conflict, made her particularly effective at helping families find common ground. "When I work with families now," Rebecca explained in a 1980 interview, "I always start by asking both the parents and the teenagers to tell me what they love about each other. It's amazing how quickly conflicts can dissolve when people remember that they're fighting because they care." not because they don't care. Elvis taught me that love is always the starting point for healing. Frank Morrison became an unexpected advocate for understanding between generations. He began speaking at parent education workshops and church groups about his experience, sharing the lessons he had learned about the importance of listening to children even when their interests seemed foreign or threatening. His talks, which he called "Learning to Listen," became popular throughout Oklahoma and neighboring states. "I used to think that being a good father meant protecting my daughter from anything I didn't understand," Frank would tell his audiences. "But Elvis helped me realize that being a good father means trying to understand my daughter, even when that understanding takes me outside my comfort zone. The bravest thing a parent can do is admit they don't know everything and ask their child to teach them." The long-term impact of the Morrison intervention can be measured not just in the family's healing, but in the countless other families who were inspired by their story to work through their own conflicts. Letters poured into Elvis from around the world, sharing stories of parents and children who had used the Morrison example to rebuild their own relationships. One particularly touching letter came from a family in Germany, where a father had driven across the country to attend an Elvis concert with his daughter after reading about the Morrison incident. The daughter had written to Elvis to thank him for inspiring her father to try to understand her love of American music, which had been a source of conflict in their home for months. Another letter, from a family in Japan, described how a mother had overcome her initial resistance to her son's interest in rock and roll by attending concerts with him and trying to understand what the music meant to him. The family credited the Morrison story with giving them the courage to bridge their cultural and generational differences. The academic study of the Morrison case continued for decades, with researchers using it as a foundational example of successful crisis intervention and family mediation. Dr. Robert Thompson of the Institute for Family Studies published a comprehensive analysis in 1985 that identified 12 specific techniques Elvis had used during the intervention, all of which proved to be consistent with the most effective therapeutic practices. Contemporary artists like Bruce Springsteen, Elton John, and later performers such as Taylor Swift have all referenced the Elvis Morrison incident when discussing their own experiences with fans and families. The story established a precedent for how performers could use their platforms not just for entertainment, but for healing and community building. The impact of that November night extended far beyond the Morrison family, and even beyond the Elvis fan community. The incident sparked a nationwide conversation about parent-teen relationships and the role of popular culture in family dynamics. Universities began incorporating the case study into their psychology and communications curricula, while parenting magazines featured articles analyzing the successful intervention techniques that Elvis had intuitively employed. Dr. Jennifer Martinez, a renowned family therapist and author of Bridging Generational Gaps, devoted an entire chapter of her best-selling book to the Morrison case. "What made Elvis's intervention so effective," Dr. Martinez wrote, "was his immediate recognition that both the father and daughter were operating from a place of love, not animosity. He understood that Frank's anger was rooted in fear of losing his daughter, while Rebecca's rebellion was rooted in her need to be understood and accepted for who she was becoming." The Morrison family maintained a close relationship with Elvis until his death in 19. They attended several more of his concerts, and Elvis would often acknowledge them from the stage, using their story as an example of how music could heal rather than divide. When Elvis died, Frank and Rebecca were among the thousands who attended his funeral, carrying a wreath that read, "To the man who taught us that love is louder than conflict." Today, more than 4 decades after that November night in Las Vegas, the Morrison intervention continues to be studied and celebrated as a masterclass in human compassion and effective conflict resolution. The story has been translated into dozens of languages and is used in family therapy training programs around the world. The lesson of that night remains as relevant today as it was in 1974. That behind every family conflict lies a foundation of love that can be rediscovered through patience, understanding, and the willingness to see each other's perspectives. Elvis Presley may have been known as the king of rock and roll, but on that November night in Las Vegas, he proved himself to be something even more valuable, a healer of hearts and a builder of bridges between people who loved each other but had forgotten how to show it.